in addition to running companies, which I did for much of my career, corporate entrepreneurship as well as entrepreneurs, I've been teaching entrepreneurship at Berkeley for 15 years. And for about the past 5 years, that's all I've been doing. And increasingly, around the world, companies, countries, governments, regions all want to understand a little bit more about what is it that happens in this part of the world, in the San Francisco Bay Area and Silicon Valley broadly spoke, that creates all this value. What do we do a little bit differently? As Paul mentioned, I wrote this book, The Other F Word, How Leaders, Teams, and Entrepreneurs Put Failure to Work. Part of it is this resilient nature that we have, this entrepreneurial mindset. But there's other elements that we have as well when we look at kind of this whole, and I'll try not to use too many buzzwords so you don't say bingo on me, but to this whole entrepreneurial ecosystem that we have with education. I mean, we're right here representing that, with technology and research that goes on, with the different resources that we have, financial resources with venture capital, all the human resources we have. What is it that we do here that's a little bit different? And we're seeing other entrepreneurial ecosystems and entrepreneurship flourish in other parts of the world, but still, every week we have groups that come here to Silicon Valley, that come to see me at Berkeley or that I work with, that say, what is it that we do that's a little bit different? So as a result of that, I've had the opportunity to dive into a lot of different emerging technologies, and that's what we're going to talk about today. What is it about these different technologies? What gave rise to them? What are, at least my prognostications, my forecasts as far as what the implications are going to be, who are going to be winners and losers on those as well. So with that, by way of starting, let's just go ahead and jump into this. One of my favorite quotes is from William Gibson, who is a writer and a futurist. And he said this 25 years ago, and I think it's even more true now than it was then, which is the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And we know that because we're used to seeing Tesla zipping up and down and around. We're used to seeing things like this every day. Did everybody have their coffee this morning? Has anybody seen this cafe in the Ferry Building? You can go ahead and order your coffee on your app, show up, punch in your number, and our robot friend here is going to go ahead and deliver, by most accounts, a pretty darn good cappuccino, latte, or whatever it is in the morning. So we take these things for granted, right? We take things like this for granted. This is me in one of the early Google self-driving cars, or playing with robots. This is actually in Central Europe, where they're really focusing on robotics. Or more robots at Flextronics, industrial robots. So we've got consumer robots and helpers and industrial robots. This is me standing in front of my book, but that's not really me standing in front of my book. That's a little 3D printed version of me, who's about yay big, standing in front. One of my student teams created a business that scans you and creates little 3D printed people. They're particularly popular to put on top of wedding cakes, for example. But the other thing it lets you do is once you get a 3D rendered version of yourself, you can embed yourself in video games. You can embed yourself. If we think about some of those movies where people get sucked into the digital world, you can now actually be a character in your own video game. So there's all sorts of things we're doing with digital in the intersection of the digital and the analog world. So as we think about all of these elements, I wanted to go back a little bit. When I talk with students now, which is all they've really known the current situation, they say there must be more going on now when it comes to change than at any time in human history. How many of us think that's the case? Maybe yes, maybe no, but that's a pretty heady statement. So I wanted to go back 100 years and say what happened in the first half of the 20th century. What are some of the inventions that either were invented then or more importantly were brought to market, were commercialized during the first half of the 20th century? We had the light bulb. Yes, Edison and others invented it in the late part of the 19th, but it was commercialized in the early 1900s as we electrified America and brought light to America and the world. The telephone, the radio, the automobile. Think how fast we went from those early automobiles into mass commercialization with Henry Ford and the Model A and the Model T. Antibiotics, the television. How's that fundamentally changed the way we consume information, media, news? The airplane, from the early 1900s at Kitty Hawk to commercial air travel just a few decades later. Even the air conditioner. I mean, these fundamentally transformed our lives in very important and meaningful ways. What happened in the second half of the 20th century? Most of the good inventions were taken, right? So we had a few things that happened. We had the computer, and especially the personal computer. Man walked on the moon. Isn't it amazing? 50 years later, we're now just thinking about what that next step for space is. Felt like we would be so much further along. We discovered DNA. We hadn't sequenced it yet. Mobile phones, the World Wide Web, video games. And video games will turn out to be more important than we think, not just because you can also take a picture of yourself and embed yourself in a game, but more important than we think as we walk through my comments this morning. And we started to create drugs, and Viagra was one of the most popular drugs in the second half of the 20th century, and that was actually an accident. We all know the Viagra story, right? Viagra didn't actually address the angina problem that it was designed to address, but the men kept coming back. And they said, maybe we have a hit on our hands for some other reason. What's fascinating about many of these is while they didn't transform our lives the way many of those inventions and introductions did in the first half, yet they laid the foundation for what comes next. If we think about what happens with innovation and invention, we go through waves. We go through waves of investigation and discovery and research, and eventually we start to commercialize. And then we have the whole issue of adoption, which is, of course, what entrepreneurs do so well, this whole concept of how do we move from those early adopters and cross that chasm into the main marketplace, into the big marketplace, as we begin to get it to work. So these are the elements, if we think about the waves, where we say what happened in that second half of the 20th century is really going to give rise to the changes that we're seeing right now. So what I'd like to do in about the 40 minutes or so that I have next, that I have with you this morning, is talk about what these waves of changes are, what's bringing them about, what the waves are, and how they are going to have winners and losers that emerge from them, which is one of the big fears that we all have right now is my job going away? And the answer for many of us is, yes, it is. The jobs that we know are going away. We're going to talk about, for those of us who are either young and students or those of us who are parents or teachers, what kind of advice do we give to that next generation as far as where to invest ourselves, our time? So I'm going to share with you 5 platforms. I'll start with 3. 5 things that have given rise to change in this 21st century. Computing power and speed. So we've seen what's happened with computing power, and this is where video games come in so much. I was talking with the head of Google Brain, Google's AI initiative, and one of the things that he said is perhaps more than anything else we owe a debt to the gamers, because what have they done? They've worked to increase speed, increase rendering, and keep costs down, make it as portable as possible, and if it weren't for commercial applications at scale, we may not have come as far as we have. So video gaming, this is where video gaming's really contributed. Number 2, we now have close to ubiquitous connectivity. We are all connected in so many different ways, not just our cell phones and computers, but all of the sensors that we have in our cars, in our homes, in our lives, in the streets, all around us. We also, with all of this data that we're gathering and that we're generating, the next thing we need to do is we need to put it somewhere. So the cost of storage has come down dramatically, and if you run out of storage, it's not a problem because whatever this thing called the cloud is, it has limitless storage as far as we're concerned, right? So now we basically have limitless and essentially free storage of all of this data. You know, the statistic that we often hear is that there was more data generated in the past 2 years than in the history of mankind before it. And more than that, there's more data that we've captured, because now we're capturing it with all of these devices. And throughout all of this, one of the fascinating things, having studied silicon and what's gone on with the industry, is that Moore's Law continues to exert itself. Moore's Law, I'm here at the Dominican table. Moore's Law, guys, what's Moore's Law? What's that? I'm sorry, yeah? Computing power doubles every 18 months. The size, the amount of transistors you get on a chip doubles every 18 months, and the cost of computing power gets cut in half. So we're continuing to see that. This is what's fascinating. So Intel's founded somewhere out here in 1968, and we see every 2 years, Gordon Moore, one of the founders, we see every 2 years it's doubling, but we're still essentially flat until we get to that inflection point around 2000. Where the number of transistors that we're seeing on the chip are so big that the computing power that we have per chipset essentially starts to go near vertical. And we've all heard that, you know, we have more computing power, for example, in our cell phones than on the first moonshots, and all of that is true. But if you think about it, our phones are connected to everything, and so that gives us almost unlimited power and access. The other two elements that are really these platform elements that I want to talk about are robotics and material science and chemistry. These are often not talked about in the same way, but as we begin to talk about things like 3D printing, as we take a look at changes in business models around manufacturing, both with regard to materials as well as how we do it, as well as who does it, these start to play a huge part. Now, there's a lot of other things we could talk about as well. We could talk about bio and medical. We could talk about personalized medicine. We could do all of these things, but we're going to stop here because this is plenty. Now, so I shared with you 5 contributing factors, 5 platforms. There are 6 sectors, trends that I want to talk about that come out of those 5. And here they are. The first is that voice has now returned as the dominant interface, as opposed to keyboards and others, and we'll see that accelerating very quickly. Number 2, artificial intelligence is going to get smarter and more ubiquitous at an increasingly accelerating pace. Third, the Internet of Things will become pervasive. Fourth, 3D printing not only expands its technology and materials, but also fundamentally changes business models. 5, virtual and augmented reality are going to move well beyond Pokemon Go and fighter games. And 6, the robots are here and more are coming. So we want to talk a little bit about those, and then what are the implications. In a couple of instances, we'll take a dive for winners and losers as well. So voice returns as the dominant interface. Voice, communication, speaking, unless we throw an iPad at our 3-year-old, is the primary way that we communicate with our children, with one another, and it has been as long as man's been around. The fascinating thing about this is how quickly has it gotten better? Computer voice sounded like computer voice for as long as we've known computer voices, except for about the last 2 years. It started to sound much more reasonable. And you can decide, do you want your car to talk to you in a British accent or in an American accent or whatever? And the other thing that's fascinating about this is not only can we understand and hear so much better, and do our artificial intelligence, our natural language processing engines create better speech, but they understand us so much better. And they understand us in non-specific tasks that we ask them to do. They're starting to become much better listeners. Something we can all put to work at home, at least I can, being a better listener. Think about how long this has really been going on. I mean, it was only in October 2011 with the iPhone 4, the 4S, that Apple introduced Siri. And that was going to be the game changer. By the way, what happened to Apple? Where are they playing in all of this? Really fascinating how they were the game changer up front and then they missed so much of it. Who did they hand the torch to? They handed it to Amazon. And Amazon was the first to come out with Alexa, with their home device. How many people here have an Alexa at home? How many people here have 2 Alexas? 3 Alexas? I have 5. So, and my wife hated it until she didn't, because Alexa turns on and off our thermostat, our Nest thermostat. She turns on and off our lights. She does all of these other things, wakes us up in the morning to whatever music we want to. It's really fascinating. As the total geek, when I travel now, I travel with Alexa. So she's my mistress on the road and says nice things to me, wakes me up, and also kind of connects me back, gives me my morning briefing. All right. So this hasn't been going on that long as we look to commercialize it. Still, when I travel around the world, so in the last 4 months I've been on 4 continents. I've been in the Middle East, I've been in Southeast Asia in a number of different places, I've been in a number of countries in Europe, and I've been across the US. Outside of the US, things like Alexa are still very early. We're starting to see some in China. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we're seeing the adoption rate really pick up. Okay, so this is what's happened. This hasn't been going on for very long. This is only 7 years old or so that we've started to interact with devices in a meaningful way with voice. This is what the landscape looks like in connected devices today. We've got Samsung, this is Harman Kardon, so that's Samsung's entry. We have Amazon, we have Google Home, we have Sonos with their smart speakers, and then we have Apple's iHome. And increasingly what Alexa is doing is embedding itself, as are others, in all sorts of other devices. So not only can you talk to Alexa to make your thermostat go up and down, but next, soon your thermostat will be able to talk back. We'll be able to play music. We'll control all of these things. So when we talk about privacy, which we'll get back to, everyone is listening. Everything is listening in your home if you start to have smart and connected devices, and increasingly we will. This is a deal. This is a negotiation that we have to understand we make every time we bring one of these devices into our home as well. China has started to get in on all of this. The biggest China mobile device or smart device like home device is the Ling Long Ding Dong. And their wake word for that is ding dong. So just like you say, Alexa, and then she's awake. This is the Ling Long Ding Dong. So we're seeing this happening around the world. And increasingly, we're seeing the investment that China's making in AI. I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. In AI and technology in some of these areas is going to soon dwarf the investment that we're making here. And it's going to be a fascinating, I don't want to call it a race, but it's going to be a fascinating dynamic as we look at this happening. We're still in voice. So as a child growing up, I used to be a little bit of a geek when it came to Star Trek. And of course, Captain James Kirk always had the universal translator so he could speak to the Romulans and whomever else it is that he had to speak with. And that was another one of those holy grails. But we all have one of those in our pocket right now. How many people have used your Google Translate or other translate devices around the world? And not only can you talk to them but it'll speak back, but you can have it decode a menu for you or a street sign or something else. And it doesn't even have to be online. I was in an airplane flying back from Europe, and the captain came on and said, "Is there a doctor on the plane?" And a couple minutes later, captain said we had a sick patient. A couple minutes later, the captain came on and said, "Is there anybody on the plane who speaks Arabic and English?" Because the doctor spoke English and the patient was Arabic. And I was coming back from the Middle East. So I happened to have loaded Arabic onto my phone, and the captain came on a couple more times. We still haven't found anybody to be able to have our sick patient talk to our doctor. So I call the flight attendant. I go, I have my universal translator, and I went and I used my Google device, my Google phone, to allow the patient to communicate to the doctor what was wrong, and vice versa. So it's really amazing what we carry with us. But it's still clunky, right? We all use that. It's still clunky. It's good for us to communicate the basics or with our Uber driver and wherever we are. But that's going to change too. By the way, winners and losers. If you are a translator, and I use a lot of those, you might want to be a little concerned about what the prospects are, especially as these devices get better. This is a startup company. I'm going to share with you a number of startup companies, many of which are ones that I've been a part of, whether they're my student teams or they come out of Berkeley or they've come out of research that I've been a part of. So this is one called Waverly Labs that, well, I'll just go ahead and play the video and we'll go from there.
I came up with the idea for a translator when I met a French girl. That's really where the story starts. I was on vacation and I met this girl. It was difficult for us to communicate because she didn't speak English very well. And even when we tried to find a solution, like using some translation app to communicate, it was horrible. Look, if you start speaking and our phones are on our face like this, forget it. This is a wall. We're out of this real world interaction. But this in your ear puts us right back in it. Lodi, put this in your ear.
Je mets ça dans l'oreille.
Yeah, put it in your ear.
Comme ça?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me in French?
Pouvez-vous entendre en français?
Oui. Je peux parler français.
Yeah, I hear you talk French. But this is awesome. But how you do it?
Yeah, it's translating. It's translating. This little wearable uses translation technology to allow two people to speak different languages, but still clearly understand each other. Simply put, I came up with the idea.
Okay, so it starts with a guy meets girl, as many of these stories do, especially guy meets French girl, right? But what's fascinating is how you start to use technology to get rid of the barriers. You know, if we think about who the winners are, one of the kind of punchlines is the winners are the people who get rid of all the hassles of using technology. Which are the technologies that we embrace that do such a great job with us because they're hassle-free? Here, let me try this one. Has anybody used a service called Amazon? Right. Amazon makes, there's an Amazon package at my house about 3 times a week, I'm sure, because Amazon makes it so easy, right? Google, they make it so easy. So those companies that get rid of the hassles of adopting technology, meanwhile, we all have technology that is hard. And we just say, why can't it be easy? When you create technology that works so easily and seamlessly that you don't have to change the way you do things, those are where the winners are going to exist. So coming out of the Consumer Electronics Show in January, this was the big headline. What's fascinating about CES, and I've been there a number of times, is that sometimes you know what the headline's going to be and sometimes you don't. And coming out of this Consumer Electronics Show, voice was everywhere. Voice was the headline, and we're seeing what's happening with voice accelerate. And it's not just because we're more used to it, because all of us are now used to talking to our cars and our phones and our Amazon Echoes and whatever else it is, but it's also because it's getting so much better. The machines are hearing us better. The machines are communicating with us better. They're getting inferences better. And as more and more devices are connected, there are more and more points of access in the way that, again, we don't have to change the way we do things to start to communicate with the machines in a much more seamless way. Number 2, artificial intelligence gets smarter. So artificial intelligence has been around actually for quite a while. I'll go through the numbers in just a moment. What is AI? At its most basic, AI is the mechanism by which a machine receives input of whatever type, data, voice, visual, and takes action based on that input. It's a series of if-then, and for those of us who've done some basic programming, it's a series of if-then statements. But what artificial intelligence basically does is it runs dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions of if-then statements until it comes up with that final solution or a series of outcomes, and it says which is the one that has the best outcome, best probability, does the best job meeting my needs. And based on that, So hundreds, thousands, millions of mini decisions, it makes that final decision. It makes that bet. And of course, there are different types of AI engines. There are ones that complement one another and work together. There are other ones that compete with one another as well, so that you have different outcomes and you say which probability is best. And then when we move beyond just AI, which means we program something that says, look, there can be a lot of inputs and we can give you different outputs, then we have machine learning or deep learning or neural networks or cognitive computing or whatever we want to call it, where we no longer need to interfere, but the more data that we get, the more robust the algorithms are, they improve themselves. They give you different outcomes. Basic AI, if I give you the same set of data, you will eventually give me the same response. Machine learning, I give you different inputs over time. Your response to that same piece of input will change based on the computations that you do. And that's where we're going. We're getting machines that learn how to program machines. So here's another takeaway on winners and losers. Is computer programming a good skill or a bad skill? Good for now. That's exactly right. You know why? The machines are going to be much better programmers than we are in 20 years. Data science, probably good for longer, because that's where we actually strategize about what data and how we want to use it and create the architecture. But the fascinating thing right now is there's such a demand for programmers in coding that you say coding is great. We're going to be, those of us who don't code very well, I put myself in that group, but code a little, are not going to have to code ever again because the engines are going to be so great that will do the coding for us. So you want to think a few steps ahead on this. Okay, a little bit on AI by the numbers. 1955, computer science professor John McCarthy, who actually did this for about 5 decades, was one of the fathers of artificial intelligence, coined the phrase. Interestingly, we don't think of AI having really come that far, but go back 20 years, and IBM's Big Blue beat the world champion, Garry Kasparov. That was considered to be a seminal moment. After that, the computers were going to rule the world. The Future of HAL from 2001, A Space Odyssey, all of that. But it took another 20 years, 2017, that AlphaGo beat the Go master, because Go is a much more complicated game. It's not as linear. The fascinating thing, by the way, is that when you got 2 different AlphaGo machines competing against one another, they started coming up with strategies that the Go masters had never thought of before, because they were doing so many computations and competing against one another that they were coming up with these amazingly non-linear types of responses and completely changed the way at the highest level this game was played. And the Go masters were learning from the machines, as opposed to the machines normally replicate the experts and then get better. The way we digest information, the way an artificial intelligence engine works. If we put artificial intelligence into the workplace, for example, in crunching numbers, is you put a layer over the work that, let's say, your accountant or your financial analyst is doing. And they're gathering the information and they're coming up with different outcomes or different reports. That engine is, or that data layer is digesting the data and saying, here are the inputs and here are the outputs. So it's learning from humans. And they also do that in call centers with voice and things like that now. So everything, when you say this call may be recorded for quality, this call may be recorded so the machines get smarter, so that we can do a better job having the machine respond with voice or whatever to your need. So that's the way that works. But now the experts are learning from the machines, which is fascinating. They're coming up with new strategies. Last year, we invested about $5 billion in artificial intelligence, mostly in private capital, venture capital here in the US. This year in China, They're going to invest more than $15 billion in government funding, plus all the private capital that's going into it. There is an arms race in artificial intelligence, and China has said by 2025 we are going to be the global leader in artificial intelligence, which of course gives rise to regulatory anti-competitive issues, the issues of Chinese firms collaborating with or acquiring American technologies, which is interesting because I work with around the world, and some of my Chinese colleagues are saying, how do we collaborate with Berkeley to have access to your AI? And I go, well, right now the government's not being terribly friendly around that because it's a national security issue. Because, as we may have noticed, there's been the occasional hacks and all these other elements, and the smarter the machines are, in some ways, the less secure our systems become. So artificial intelligence becomes a national security issue. Winners and losers, what are the implications from that from a policy standpoint, from a people standpoint? It also means, if you're in the business of AI and you're expecting exits, IPOs, acquisitions, and China is on your radar, you may not have access to that marketplace as well. So, other components. Pricewaterhouse came out last year with a list of efficiency gains that AI and other technologies can drive. Efficiency gains is a euphemism, right? Efficiency gains is how many jobs can we get rid of? How much cost can we take out? Which explains a little bit of our current president as well, because people are so, it's like, don't let the jobs go away. Well, the jobs are going to go away that you're in right now, but you have to be willing to move to those new jobs. But take a look at these sectors: transportation and logistics and storage, more than 50%. We're going to come back to that in just a little bit. I'm going to show a video of one of the Amazon warehouses, for example, and let's think about that. Manufacturing, as we automate, as we use robotics, as we do 3D printing. Retail, as we buy more online, as we also create more self-help opportunities. And again, all of these we're going to come back to. And financial services. Financial services, which are the jobs that are most at risk? Which are the jobs that are most at risk? The jobs that do a lot of things with data, the jobs that do a lot of things that are repetitive, whether it's intellectual or whether it's physical. There's elements that are much less at risk, and that's the end of our time together. We'll talk about that. A few examples. How many of you, let's see, here we are, customer support, customer experience. All of these things, personalization. You think about this. The last century was all about creating economies of scale. How do we build at huge scale? Think about the production line. Think about Henry Ford. You can have any color you want as long as it is black, right? Economies of scale. Think about what all this data and customized manufacturing means. It's economies of unscale, personalized medicine for cancer treatment. Your computer configured exactly the way you want it the next day. Fashions that you can order and customize online, and it'll be there in 2 or 3 days. So when we talk about gaining scale, how do we create scale at unscale? The only way to do that is through automation and data. Winners and losers there too. So the traditional manufacturing line, we're going to start to see huge changes in that. Do you know when you're interacting with a person versus an automated chatbot? Anybody know that? Anybody ever go online to ask for help in resolving your phone bill, or you have a problem, technical problem? There is nobody at the other end of this. There's not a person at the other end of this communication, right? It's typically the first 2 or 3 or 5 communications that you have. Don't you like it too when, even if you're on hold and you hear the little tick, 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 like somebody's really typing at the other end? It's like, how stupid do you think we are, right? But we're living in the fantasy that there really is somebody there. Or it slowly comes out like somebody's really hunting and pecking. It's like, yeah, right. So there's a chatbot at the other end that's processing and processing and processing, and only until you give it a challenge that it can't resolve, at that point, it will go ahead and kick you over to a real person, in all likelihood, to try and resolve it. So we're already interacting with machines in ways that in some ways we don't always recognize until we pause and we go, of course we are. Virtual personal assistants. Does anybody have a virtual personal assistant here? Of course we all do. Google even tells us that we have one. Hello, meet your personal Google assistant. Right? I've got AI bots that do scheduling for me. If I wanted to schedule a meeting with Whitney, you would get an email from somebody that looks like they might be my assistant. It's just an AI bot checking my calendar until we figure it out. So there's a lot of things that we can do using AI, accessing our data. Here it comes again, accessing our data to help us solve problems, because my AI bot knows all 6 of my different calendars, my UC Berkeley calendar, my personal calendar, my speaking calendar, all of those things, checks all of those, prioritizes them, and then finds a time for us to meet. Next Tuesday, 3 o'clock. Research and analysis. So one of the areas where we've always felt that this is where humans have some unique and proprietary components are in decision making, are on gathering data and figuring out what does it really mean. Machines make decisions better than we do. Not all the time, and if they're human decisions, that's different. But data-driven decisions, machines are crunching the numbers. Sometimes we say, well, that was a gut call. Do you know what gut is? Those of you who do. Gut is actually your subconscious crunching the number and saying, something doesn't feel right on the surface. I've seen these patterns before. My gut decision is different. Computers don't have guts. They just have the data. And they're making those decisions better than our guts are. And they're not biased by the recency effect or the bad morning I just had. So accounting and finance, we're going to see huge disruption. Those of us who just paid somebody to file our tax returns or extend our returns, that sector is going to be fundamentally restructured in the next 15 years. Once we can figure out what the new tax law means, maybe we can find it. Maybe we can find a machine to help us with that, right? And robo investment advisors. And it used to be that all of our key investment advisors would go, "Oh, no mo robo. No, we're not going to do robo." Oh yeah, but wait. Vanguard, Schwab, these are the largest robo advisors, 47 billion under management, 10 billion under management, and those are the robo advised funds that we have under management as of last year. It's probably twice that by now, given what's going on and given what's happening as people are moving to index funds, et cetera, that are much more easily managed by robo advisors, don't require active investment management. Autonomous vehicles and drones. Well, we know what's happening there and how fast it's happening. Over the weekend in the San Francisco Chronicle, there were 2 stories. One is, despite the fatality in the self-driving vehicle in Arizona, the fatality that we had here with the Tesla that was on auto mode, that we're moving forward to fully autonomous driving. And the other is that your fully autonomous taxi may even be free, which we'll see. But you are going to be bombarded with ads in that taxi. It's going to be shrink-wrapped on something. There'll be videos on top, videos inside. There will be offers for it. Hey, Starbucks is closing in 25 minutes. Would you like a discounted croissant? We can stop on the way to your meeting. Whatever else it is. By the way, you know what gives you better offers? The more data you give it. Right? The more the machine knows about you, the better an offer and the better targeted offer it can provide. Then we have natural language processing and voice we've talked about, and diagnostics and predictions. So I want to share with you a little bit. This is a company called Cardiologs. A couple of my students, data scientists, postdocs in data science, founded this about 3 years ago, and they just got FDA approval last year. What they did is they digested, there's that expression again, they digested over 500,000 ECGs, electrocardiograms. So the data that came from from your heart, the electromagnetic pulses, and then the diagnostics that some of the best cardiologists in the world provided. So they built correlation, and then they started building causation. They now have an engine that in less than a second can give diagnostics on an ECG at the 99th confidence interval when it comes to all doctors of the best cardiologists in the world. Faster, more accurate. It gets because, and say, well, what about gut? It's like, how much gut was in the 500,000 and now it's more than 1 million ECGs with the right diagnoses, because that gut said there was a little blip here, or there was a delay there was a murmur here. That gut that cardiologists have has actually been incorporated in the engine. Now, winners and losers. What if you're a cardiologist? Is that a winner or a loser for you? Either you better become, or here's another way of looking at it. Forget about diagnostics. How about care? Focus on care. I mean, one of the key things that we have challenges with so much is all of these other, it's like, why do you go into medicine to care for patients or to do the surgery or whatever? There's other elements, the billing. Oh, thank God, we're gonna automate the billing. We're gonna automate reimbursement. Where's there a huge amount of risk? In diagnostics. So we're gonna reduce risk, which means my insurance premiums may go down, and maybe if I'm a cardiologist that wants to give care, then that's good for me. If I'm a diagnostician, I better get really, really good at diagnostics, and I better understand how to leverage tools like this in my practice. So fascinating things like this. By the way, nobody on the team, on the initial team, was a doctor or cardiologist. They just looked at this, and they were data scientists, and they go, this is a data-rich environment full of all sorts of false positives, false negatives, and bad decisions. We can do better with data. Now, they brought some of the top cardiologists in the world onto their advisory team, but they came at it from a data standpoint. Internet of Things, as we go through our items. It's the Internet of everything these days. Right, look at how many connected devices we have already. In 2018, where are we? 35 billion. How many people in the world today? 8 billion? 9 billion? So we have lots of connected devices. My living room, my home, kind of looks like this, and I think some of ours here do, and if not, it will soon. If somebody rings my doorbell now, I can answer. And Amazon just bought, it was a Ring doorbell, so video doorbell. Amazon just bought them as they're moving into now owning the home with the Echo and Ring doorbell. So if somebody's there, even if I'm on vacation, I can say, just leave the package, I'm in the shower, right? We know all of those things. You can provide access via codes for locks for house cleaners or whatever. Amazon has a new service where if you have a camera inside the home, you can actually allow the Amazon delivery person access to the home because they're on camera, unlock the door, watch them on the way out. So you can give people restricted access inside your home that's supervised, which is getting a little creepy, right? It's getting a little bit out there, and so much more. So we know that, and all of the machines know we're there. My thermostat knows when I'm there. My thermostat, even though I may set it to 70 degrees, will not heat my house if it doesn't sense, with its proximity sensor, that there's somebody in the room or there's somebody in the home. It also is attached to my cell phone. So my wife may not know where I am, but my thermostat does, right? Which is an odd thing. So what's interesting is as we go mainstream, Target's now opened this is a prototype store that they have in San Francisco. And if you like Internet of Things devices, go here. It's in the Metreon on 4th and Mission. They have hundreds of smart devices, all of these devices and more that you can try out. And this is their test bed. And they work with early stage startups. They have an area called the Garage where they even showcase products that aren't available yet, so they can see which products people touch the most. Do they have sensors on every one of those devices? You bet. Do they know which ones? Are they capturing data? Absolutely. And the products that do best here in this little special place move into the mainstream Target right upstairs. If it does well there, they start to expand across America. So they're using this as a differentiation. If you think about Target as a mass merchant, different from Walmart. Target's saying we're a lifestyle brand. It's not just about price. It's about making people's lives better, more fashionable. They're kind of the fashion-forward mass merchant, right? And they're embracing technology in a way that none of the others are. So this is a fun place to check out. It's a fun place to go with kids too, by the way, because they know how to use these things intuitively, right? Smart kitchen. Do you want your smart blender, toaster, whatever it is, your submersion cooking machine, whatever it is. So, right, you've got all of those. And then there's Amazon. Now, Amazon fundamentally disrupted retail. They disrupted retail by saying, we're going to go around the retailer, we're going to go around the bookstore, put the bookstores out of business. When they bought Whole Foods, does anybody know what happened to the share price of stores, of groceries around the world, around the US? It was a bad day to be in the retail grocery business. Now, they're in the retail grocery business, and they're saying, we're going to make it more efficient. They've opened this store in Seattle. You may have heard of it, right? The Amazon Go store. Just walk out. Everything you put in your bag has a sensor, and when you walk out, you get charged. No grocery lines, no nothing. So they're going to fundamentally, but what's the one product you need every day? Food. Amazon wants you to buy something every day from them. The thing that's fascinating about this one is as we take a look at what's happening elsewhere. Here's a Chinese retail concept where it's a completely independent, standalone, unstaffed convenience store. The truck can show up, drop it off, and it's remotely staffed. You swipe your phone, just like the Amazon store. And if you think about how this could work as well with festivals or with areas after a natural disaster or things like that, you can just drop retail stores in, you don't even have to staff them. And then with smart and connected cities, so I've been talking about smart homes, but take this on an institutional scale. Think about what happens with our cities. Where's the point that we're already very smart and connected in our cities? Transportation. And we're getting better and better at this. Think about all the different parking, buses, increasingly with all the different ride-sharing apps, the fact that we're all connected with our cars as well. One of my students launched a parking app that helps you find the best parking spot, and it will also tell you if you're at a spot when street cleaning happens. And I remember he was late to meet me 5 years ago because his car got towed in San Francisco, because this should never happen. I'm going to build a company around this. And he did. So, and his technology is now embedded in BMWs and all of these others in the navigation systems, and also has his own application to help you stop to do all of that. I'll give him a pitch. SpotAngel is the name of the company. So you can download the app and it'll give you parking advice. VR and AR. It's been more promise than reality, hasn't it? With VR and AR. I mean, I've got some VR devices. So I'm guessing many of you have used VR, but unless you're a hardcore gamer, probably not that much. More of you have used augmented reality than virtual reality, right? The thing that made us all understand what augmented reality is what? Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go was the breakthrough in augmented reality. So here are my prognostications. Non-gaming applications for augmented reality and virtual reality are going to surpass games. We're going to still drive the technology with gaming because there's money there, venture money as well as customers. But take a look at the market size. 18 billion this year, 215 billion just 3 years from now. Where's that going to come from? I'll give you one or two tidbits on that. Think about VR applications, virtual reality applications that are non-gaming, telepresence and collaboration. You can be in a conference, you can do a conference with virtual reality with others all in the room. When you turn your head, they're all right there with their avatars. Training and therapy. People are using virtual reality that are paralyzed because it enables them to fundamentally visualize when they look down that their feet are moving. It reinforces their brain. It gets the synapses firing, and people who have been paralyzed are using virtual reality therapy with an overlay of artificial intelligence to begin to reprogram their brains. And then remote experiences. My 86-year-old mother, who lives in Villa Marin, just a mile or two from here, does not travel much anymore. But there's some places she would love to go. Wouldn't it be great to strap on the VR headset and say, we are sailing the seas in the Caribbean, right? So those remote experiences. My take is augmented reality is going to be bigger than virtual reality, because we can overlay our own objects, our artificial or augmented objects, on top of the real world. Couple of examples. Alibaba in China, they have Singles Day. Singles Day is the anti-Valentine's Day for China. It takes place every year in November. They did $18 billion in online sales in one day in 2016, I think it was 17, more than Brazil's entire online sales activity for a year in one day. And much of it, they did an experiment around virtual reality shopping, putting cameras in stores and allowing consumers to walk in, look around, and actually act as if they were fundamentally inside the location. I'm not going to bother with this. This is a Cisco video that just shows you using virtual reality in a conference room with people spread around the world. Pokemon Go came out of UC Berkeley, one of my former students. So we know how successful Pokemon Go was. And now over 1 billion downloads at this point, and a nice success. But more than anything else, what it did was it introduced most of us to this concept of augmented reality. And as opposed to being completely behind the glasses, it got people outside doing things and doing things together, as opposed to completely tethered and inside your own little world behind these virtual reality glasses. I love applications like this. This is Bosch, the German automotive parts company, where they're using augmented reality in auto shops. You look at an engine and say, here's where the exhaust repair needs to go. And then a step-by-step, as you can see on the left, a step-by-step of how to disassemble and reassemble it. Or you want to look inside a car because something happened to the window. That's the inside of the car. So if you're, and think about all the different applications for training, repair, household repair, all of those things. Think about us if we have to do a repair. You just hold your smartphone up to whatever it is, download the app and say, oh, that's how I fix the garbage disposer, or whatever it is that we need to do. And then the retail applications are amazing. Hold your phone up to the street, same example. Oh, look, discount at Starbucks for the next 10 minutes. Or the bakery is closing in an hour, everything's half off. Or Black Panther is starting in 5 minutes, all the seats are 20% off. Or whatever else it is. But what's the deal you got to make on that? Share your data, baby. Share your data. It's that same issue that is really the issue of today. All right. 3D printing. I'm going to do, Paul, I'm running a little over. I'm going to do 5 minutes. We'll do 3D printing and robotics, and then we'll have a conversation. So 3D printing grows up. Now, we all know 3D printing traditionally. Right, this is obviously sped up, where you've got an additive printing head that's laying down resin or plastic. But what if we could do it differently? This is a Silicon Valley company called Carbon 3D that uses resin and digital light synthesis, so a laser underneath, to not print additively, but rather to build inside the resin bath. And take a look. Now, this is sped up to 7 times, but still, we're going to spend 20 seconds doing this, so it would take a couple of minutes. And the size of this is almost the size of a basketball that's coming out, and is flexible. And it's pulling an entire 3D printed, essentially, device or object out of a pool of resin about that thick. Because what the laser is doing is fusing the resin together in real time. Now, what are the applications for that? How does that change the way we think about 3D printing. First of all, think about doing that at scale. You can now do that at scale. That took a minute and a half to do. In a 3D printer, that would take an hour. How do you start to do those things at scale? And this scales really well. Well, AdiDAS is actually starting to do this. You can create custom footbeds and soles in real time for customized shoes that hold up. The CEO, Joe, says, stop prototyping, start producing. We've been using 3D printing to prototype, but not for large-scale manufacturing. The interesting thing, too, is the business model. So there's elements of the technology that are here, but the business model is a four-step business model. It's not just sell the machine. It's no, I'm going to own the machine and license it to you. I'm going to sell you all the consumables. I'm going to license it to sectors that I don't want to be in, like medical devices. Can you imagine 3D printing body parts? Right, they're using it to 3D print soft body parts like earlobes and nipples, and they're looking at heart valves and things like that. And then the data behind all of it. The more you print, the more you know, the better you get. So really interesting on the business model. The other thing that's happening with all of this is now we're looking at different materials. We thought about it for prototyping, we thought about it for plastics, but now we're looking at doing it for metals. One of my student teams comes out of the shipping industry. When a large ship is down in port because they've got a problem with a part, a propeller or something, it can cost them tens of thousands of dollars per day. It's not the cost of the part that's the problem. It's getting it there. It's the fact that it may not exist. So if you've got a ship that's down for 2 weeks, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars in downtime and sometimes perishable products. What if you had a network of 3D printers, as you could see, that can print metal parts with furnaces to provide the same caliber, working with the OEMs, with the suppliers on exact product specs around the world, to keep your fleets up and running? What does that do to efficiency? The business model is fundamentally different. And by the way, if I'm a ship owner, I don't care about the cost of the part. I care about the cost of my downtime. It may be a $1,000 part, but it's going to cost me $200,000 in lease time. So it's changing business models. And then we have robots. What about the robots? Well, they're coming. But they're going to look a lot more like R2-D2 than C-3PO for a while. Actually, C-3PO always kind of creeped me out anyway, so I like that. They're going to be much, manufacturing we know. Robots have been there for a long time. But for housekeeping and things like that, we have the robot. And I will spare you one of the million videos on the internet of cat riding Roomba. But if you're curious, Google that, right? So we'll see things like this as they're getting smarter and smarter with sensors and capabilities and batteries and all that. They go back, recharge themselves. When we look at warehouse and logistics, huge savings. Combine artificial intelligence with robotics and take a look at things like this. So this is an Amazon warehouse. The thing that's fascinating about this particular video is this video is not brand new. This video is a number of years old. Now, some of you have probably seen the Amazon warehouses, but the ballet that these robots do. And what happens is people who pick and pack products in Amazon warehouses don't walk up and down aisles anymore. The aisles come to them. So it's this ballet of shelving that comes to the picker and the packer that just basically stand there. And Amazon also figures out, or the robots figure out the size of the box, the other packaging that goes in to limit damage, and all of those other components. So while Amazon is hiring hundreds of thousands of people, think about the efficiency that they're driving. This is an example of that, the efficiency that they're driving through their fulfillment operations. There's one more thing I just want to share with you as we think about warehouses. I'm waiting for the video to get there. It should be there in a moment. Is we're the people. We're the people that are managing all of these things. And it's amazing the throughput that we're seeing. So, and also what skills, there we go. And what skills do they need? There's some of them need fundamentally different skills than the warehouse workers of today. They need to know how to program machines. They need to know how to work with technology in much more fluid ways. Retail and food service. Well, we've already seen that, right? We have Cafe X, also Flippy at Cali Burger just made his debut or her debut a couple of months ago, an automated burger flipper. And we're going to see more and more robotics, especially as we see labor shortages in food service. We're going to find more ways to be more efficient at those components that can be automated. Delivery drones we know about. There's Amazon with the delivery drone at UC Berkeley. One of the teams that I work with is called Kiwi. I took this just last week. They have little drones that go around campus with food in the back and wait for people outside the classrooms and let them know that they're there, or wait for them outside their dorms. So that's a little delivery drone. Oftentimes they also have a little periscope up there so you can see them coming. And farming. Same issue. We have huge issues with labor issues, and as we close our borders, we're going to have more issues around that, but we can have the machines do a lot of that work for us. And my favorite, it's like, let the machine get close to the bomb. I don't want to be near the bomb, right? So there's so many different things that we can use robots for. What does it mean for me? Let the humans do what the humans do well. What do great leaders do? They set vision, they motivate people, they work with people, they create teams, they cultivate culture. Those are the elements. And this comes from McKinsey right here, this particular slide, and it's an entire infographic. Which are the ones that are replaceable? Managing others, only 9% of those tasks are replaceable. Applying expertise, maybe 18. Shareholder interactions, 20. But go over here. Predictable physical work, predictable office work, data processing or data collection. 2/3, 3/4 of those jobs will be obsoleted by robots, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, and automation. Takeaway, Cognizant just came out with a study. It says, of course there are fears of a jobless future, but there are going to be new jobs created, and we need to be the ones that are focusing on what those new jobs are. Those areas that we just talked about from the McKinsey study. And there's a lot of prognostications about what those look like, and Cognizant has their own model too of where those jobs are. We could spend an entire hour talking about this. The last thing that I want to leave with is Jack Ma of Alibaba. So somebody recently asked him, what should we teach our children? Here's what Jack had to say.
Value, believing, independent thinking, teamwork, care for others. These are the soft part. The knowledge may not teach you that. That's why I think we should teach our kids on sports, the music, the painting, art. So making sure humans should be different from everything we teach should be different from machine. If the machine can do better, you have to think about it. Education, it's a big challenge now. If we do not change the way we teach, 30 years later we'll be in trouble. Because the way we teach, the thing we teach our kids are the things the past 200 years is knowledge-based. And we cannot teach our kids to compete with machine who is smarter. We have to teach something unique. That is, machine can never catch up with us.
So I think that's the place for us to close, as we are in a place of learning. How and what do we teach? Paul, let's have a little bit of a chat. I'm sure you've got some questions.